Hello and welcome back to part 2 of making the Hand of God rig. In this video I shall be dyeing the leather, stitching everything together and carrying out the final assembly of the belt and the holster. Now if you've got any comments or questions, drop them into the comments box below and I'll do my best to answer them. Thanks very much for watching. So I've let it sit overnight, and as you can see the oil has spread throughout the leather nice and evenly. The colour has pretty much returned to the original state before I put the oil on. And now the next process is applying the dye. Most of these components, the belt, the strap and the smaller components, I'm going to use a dip dyeing method, and the holster I shall use a sheepskin pad. So I'm going to be using Fibing's Walnut Pro dye on this order. It gives a nice even finish and it's by far the best kind of leather dye to use. The best way to use it is to make a little bath of dye. Make sure you're wearing some gloves. Tap it off on the side. And I shall stick this outside to dry, to air dry. This is the belt keeper. Dyeing leather doesn't have to be a messy business if you do it carefully. Though it does look dark at the moment, that will dry to a nice consistent colour. Now if you've got small pieces to dye, you can make a little wire hook to just dip it in like that. Finally, the belt itself. So say this is the best method of dyeing because you can be sure that the dye is going to get into all the little crevices and stampings in the stitching holes. There's going to be no spots that are missed. Now this component is the little shelf I was telling you about. It's a combination shelf and welt. I've got to shape the end of it, but I'll just put some dye on that as well. And these little components are part of the snap locking system. That is part of the holster now. Now the holster, I dye it using a little wool pad because I can't fit it in my tray. But this method works just as well. The secret is to get a nice even coat on as fast as possible. Do the inside as well. Good thing about this Pro Oil dye is it doesn't matter how many coats you put on, it won't darken it. So you get a nice consistent finish. A lot of the cheaper Fibings dye, the dye stuffs are a powder base, and if you put more than one coat on, it just gets darker and darker and darker until it's virtually black. So you can't really tell what the colour is. It's about half the price, so people buy a lot of it and they don't get consistent results. But if you spend a bit more on the Pro dye, you get much better results. See, that looks quite dark now, but that'll dry out to a nice colour. So that'll go out on the drying table. So now all I've got to do is empty that back into the dye bottle using that funnel, and it's a nice, easy, efficient way, relatively mess-free way to dye leather. Now if, like me, you have a hole in your glove and you need to get some dye off your fingers, best thing I've found is a bit of methylated spirits. Now the pieces have only been out on the drying table for a few minutes, and you can see how quickly they dry and the colour lightens. So it's been a couple of hours now. The pieces and parts have been outside air drying and they've lightened up considerably, and I've got a nice even consistent finish. The next phase is to burnish all the edges that need burnishing, and also I shall slick the inside of the holster and the back of the belt. I shall make a start on that using some gum trag. Then it will be on to final assembly. Here's the inside of the holster. I've just given it a coat of gum trag and I've slicked it up with this boning tool, giving it a nice polish. I shall let that dry. So a coat of gum trag on the back of the belt, slicking it down with the antler, makes it nice and smooth. That when that dries out, that'll be nice and firm, and I shall give it a finished coat of tan coat. Now here you can see the burnished edge of the belt. I shall do this to all the components before assembly, and I use this product from Barry King Tools. It's called YO Quick Slick. It's a liquid that you apply, let it soak in, and then you just rub it with a slicking tool, or you can use a burnishing wheel, and it produces a really nice tight slicked edge. That's going to look really nice when it's got the finish on it. So there's the inside of the holster, and you can see how nice and smooth that is. Compressed all the fibres. Again, that'll have a finish of tan coat to seal it all in when it's finally assembled, and I've moulded the holster to the gun. So I've got all the pieces and parts finished, and the edges are slicked. It's all ready for final assembly. I'm going to start with stitching on the bullet lace, and then I will move on to the holster. Now I've got the the snap attachments installed. Okay, so now I'm ready to stitch on the bullet lace. I'm going to use a saddle stitch. Basically all that is a single piece of thread with a needle on each end, and you're constantly crossing over as you go through each hole. It's a super strong way of stitching leather together. It'll take me about an hour and a half to stitch on 30 loops. So I'll get cracking on that and come back in a while and show you the finished result. But if you're interested in learning the intricacies and the fine art of saddle stitching, and believe me, it is a fine art, I recommend checking out a channel called Armitage Leather, run by Nigel Armitage here on YouTube. He does a fantastic job of explaining and demonstrating all the various techniques relating to the saddle stitch, and I'll put a link in the description below. Right, so it's taken me about half an hour and I've got 17 loops stitched on. These are for 45 long colt. Nice fit like that. So I shall get the rest of these sewn on, and I can work on the billet and buckle straps. I've finished stitching all the loops on, and I've added the rounds in there. I'll leave those overnight so that forms the loops nicely. And what I shall do on the ends is add one of these saddler's copper rivets. It's a nice little decorative feature. The buckle strap all stitched on, finished off with a nice decorative saddler's rivet. So the rivet goes in from that side. Flip the belt over and washer on there. It's the right way. Tap it down, trim it off with a cutter. Secret to setting these copper saddler's rivets is to pin them over gently, so it's little light taps, because this copper is very soft. If you hit it too hard, you'll just bend the shaft of the rivet. So little taps like that, and then you can finish it off with pinning tool, which just rounds off the edges nicely. And there's a nice copper rivet, nicely set. So here's the hammer retainer. It's got a double bleed knot on the top, and it's designed so that when it's actually on the gun, it tucks in so you can't really see it. It was something that Will designed specifically for the movie. The original period holsters didn't have a hammer retainer, but they wanted one on the movie, but not to be seen. So the next thing to do is to braid the lace that holds it onto the holster. So I just put it on this metal spike, so that means I can hold it and do the braiding, and then it'll be ready to install into the holster. So I've done the braid on the hammer retainer, and I've inserted it into the holster. It's easier to do it this way before you stitch it up. There's a bit of a faff trying to get four of these pieces through if you've already stitched up the holster. When I finish the holster, I put the gun in. I shall, get that the correct length over the hammer, and then do a little finishing knot on this end to stop it from pulling out. And by the way, here you can see this is the snap detail that Will's come up with. So I've installed that. Basically, when this is all assembled, it snaps together round the belt and stops the holster from being able to ride up on the belt. So I'm getting ready to assemble the holster. I've applied some glue to the edge here where I'm going to fold it over, and also to this welt. So that will be glued in with contact cement. That'll hold it in place while I punch the holes. Then I shall saddle stitch the seam and it'll be ready to install the toe plug. So saddle stitching the seam. Pre-punch these holes. This wax braided thread is incredibly strong. So I've stitched up the seam, I've trimmed it off, sanded it, and I've made a start on slicking the edge. There you can see the welt. So it's quite a really fat welt, and there's the shelf in there that the trigger guard sits on. Now I'm just going to apply a coat of edge coat. This is a dark brown. Let that soak in, and then I can finish slicking the edge up. So now you can see a bit of build up a bit of heat on the slicking tool. Doesn't take much. You get a lovely slicked, shiny finish. See that? Perfect slicked edge. So now I'm ready to glue in the toe plug. So I shall apply a little coat of contact cement to the edge. This helps hold it in position while you stitch it in. Same goes for the inside of the toe of the holster, just a little bit. I found the easiest way to insert the toe plug is to attach it to the end of a piece of dowel with a screw. And what you can do is insert it at that side, push it down. And you can see that's nicely in position there, the glue's holding it. And I've got enough of a tail on the thread to saddle stitch that toe plug in. It's a bit fiddly. Got to take your time. There's no way to rush this process. Often helps to have a pair of pliers. In a lot of period holsters that I've seen, it's not uncommon for the toe plug to be missing. In fact, it's more of a rarity to see an original holster that's got a toe plug in it. They used to, well, what happened, because they were using a linen thread, over time it would weaken and break, and then eventually the toe plug would fall out. Or another thing that would happen is somebody would buy a holster for a particular gun, and then they might have a different gun at some point with a longer barrel, so they just cut the toe off to accommodate it. That's quite a common thing to see in period gun leather. Back in the day, it would have just been much the same as we'd think of a utility tool belt, because that's all a gun is a tool to do a job, whether it's protection when you're out in the wilds for marauding animals or whatever, or to put down a sick animal, hunt for food. It's just a tool, like a hammer, really. So there you can see I've started the saddle stitch. I shall work my way around, get that finished. Then I chamfer the edges, burnish that. Takes me probably take about half an hour to stitch that in. So I'll come back in a minute and show you the finished result. So there's the finished toe plug. Took me about half an hour to stitch it in. Burnished all the edges. Slicked it all down. Yeah, pleased with that. Turned out really well. Now the holster is all sewn up, got the toe plug in, I've burnished the edge. I've installed the hammer keeper with the braided thread there. Now the last thing to do on this is to attach the holster loop. Now I've riveted one side in, and the most crucial thing when you're doing this is to wrap this around really nice and tight. And then you mark through the second hole where you're going to punch out to place your rivet on the loop. Now I've made that mark and I've made the hole, and I've made it a little bit tighter as well. So when it's all assembled, it should be a nice snug fit. I'll get this loop riveted on, and that will be the holster finished. That's the loop riveted on, nice and smooth. It's a case now of assembling the holster. be a nice tight fit, and then you can snap together the line snap. That secures it in place. There we go. I'll leave that in place overnight, let the leather stretch out to the contours of the gun. Hammer loop in place. I'll put a finish coat, tan coat on there just to finish it off, but that's essentially the holster made, finished. So these are brass double cap rivets. They make a nice secure fastening for the buckle. Now this rectangular buckle is solid brass, it's cast in England, and it makes a very nice buckle for this rig. So they look on the front. Here I'm using the Little Wonder Press by Weaver Leather. It's in their Master Tools range, and it's a really nice piece of heavy duty kit. Nice and secure, solid attachment for the buckle. Now the last rivet to go in is this saddler's rivet. Polish the head up. That goes in there like that. That secures the keeper in position. So I've just peened that one over and I made sure that one's a bit recessed. It's nice and smooth, so it's not going to rub on the belt when it passes through the keeper. So here's a look at the finished belt. The buckle is all assembled there. Copper rivets in place, maker's mark. Nice border stamping detail. 30 bullet loops, all hand stitched across the back with 45 long colt. So the last thing I do is stamp in the year it was made. This is for my reference and anybody else in the future looking back on my work. So here's a look at the finished holster. I've put some tan coat on it. There you can see the features that are added by Will to lock it into the belt, so the belt passes through there and that holds it firmly in position. There you can see the trigger shelf, so that's where the trigger guard fits on there. Nice positive fitment. Hammer loop. Holds it securely in the holster. And when the holster slides onto the belt, it's a nice positive fit. So here's a look at the completed Hand of God rig. If you've got any comments or questions, drop them in the box below and I'll do my best to answer them. If you'd like one of these made, it'd be my pleasure to do so. Check out my website, londonjacksleather.com. I've got various options listed on there. But I've also got patterns for all the popular Old West handguns. Navies, Remingtons, Colts in all the barrel lengths, Schofield, Ruger Vaquero, new and old frame models. So I hope you've enjoyed watching this film. If so, hit the like button, share it, hit the notifications bell, that way you'll be told whenever I send out a new video. If you can follow me on Etsy as well, that will be helpful. That way also you'll get notifications when I list a new product. So it just remains for me to say thank you very much for watching, and I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you've learned something. I hope it's helped you in your leatherworking projects. and I'll see you on the next video. Bye for now.